Welcome back to Penguin Classics On Air.
I just think that the immediacy of the political context so much in our tradition has kept some of our writers from achieving true greatness. You think I'm being too hard?
I think you're being hard, but I think that I think that you're right in many cases, in many instances, and that it's those who seem to rise above that who are the ones who just immediately, it's what I was thinking about tonight when we were talking about what is a classic, and I was like, it's one of those things where you know it when you see it,
right,
or you know it when you read it. Or I'm thinking of someone like a Jean Toomer, when you were talking about, Deo, the lost generation and then the generation of African-American writers. A Jean Toomer who writes Cain, this beautiful experimental novel set in what he sees as a dying Southern culture, and has a final story in the first section that's a story about a lynching, a very brutal, very real lynching. And he's writing during a period when this is a practice that's still happening, and he dares to be literary with it. He dares to be experimental. He dares, so that when we leave that period, that era behind, this story will both be kind of a representation of that historical moment, but also so much more, because it also happens to be a love story. It also happens to be an elegy to a dying culture. It's all those layers that Skip was talking about.
And to me, Cain, which you should read. I mean, if you haven't read Cain, you want a great read, C-A-N-E by Jean, J-E-A-N, Toomer, T-O-O-M-E-R. It's one of the great works of the 20th century. It's certainly, to me, the greatest work of the Harlem Renaissance. And he also was a modernist in the lost generation. I mean, he worked both sides of he worked uptown and downtown. I've just spent a lot of time thinking about Cain. I've taught it every year since I was 26 years old, and that was, 10 years ago, right? And he wrote the blackest book in the Harlem Renaissance, and then decided to be a white man. This is like the irony of this guy. He just said, no, I'm barely Negro. And then he wrote all these drafts of an autobiography. And he said that his grandfather was P.B.S. Pinchback, the first black lieutenant governor of Louisiana. And for 30 days, he was actually the governor of Louisiana. And he, in one of the greatest acts of prestidigitation in the history of race relations in America, he said that his grandfather was really white and passed as a black man to gain economic opportunity during Reconstruction. Now, how many white people pass as black in order to gain opportunity? This is the most ridiculous claim.
So it seems that longevity is a quality that we could associate with a classic, certainly with respect to Iole Roy, with respect to Harriet Jacobs' work, with respect to some of the very earliest slave narratives that in certain ways were documentary. And I'm interested in this movement towards the present and how our conception of these works as literature or as history sort of change.
There's a popular assumption that many classics, however deserving, go unread. A sense of guilt looms over the great books we have not finished. In answer to this, Alan Walker, our Senior Director of Academic Marketing and Sales, started an ambitious marathon. Read one book by an author per letter of the alphabet. For each episode of Penguin Classics On Air, Alan presents a rediscovered classic that complements the topic of our show.
The letter L. It was a scorching midsummer heat wave in New York City when I was reading my letter L for my first round of classics reading. I came across this great passage from the opening of the second chapter of Nella Larsens' amazing novel Passing, which describes a hot summer day in Chicago. Sharp particles of dust rose from the burning sidewalks, stinging the seared or dripping skins of wilting pedestrians. What small breeze there was seemed like the breath of a flame fanned by slow bellows. Yes, exactly. I couldn't have said it any better. Nella Larsens' short novel is an intricate exploration of racial consciousness involving two light-skinned African-American women who both pass as white women. The themes here are very similar to my C pick from my first round of reading, A House Behind the Cedars by Charles Chesnutt, but the styles couldn't be more different. Larsen was a modernist and the most important woman writer of the Harlem Renaissance. Despite only publishing 2 novels in the 1920s, quitting writing altogether in the 30s, and working full-time as a nurse until her death in 1964. Her first novel, Quicksand, is also available in Penguin Classics. Larsen, in fact, worked in the Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx, which I pass on a bus every day on my way to work. For all of you interested in reading other novels about passing, I would recommend Chestnut's novel, A House Behind the Cedars, about a young Southern woman of mixed race who gets engaged to a white man under false pretenses. Chestnut's novel resonates today, reminding us that it was barely a century ago that words like quadroon and octoroon were part of the American dialogue on race.
Thank you for listening to Penguin Classics on Air. All of the books mentioned on the show are available wherever books are sold. Visit us again for more programs on great classic books.